Welcome back to Inside Scoop with a Fraudster. This is your host, Stefanie Hoover, and I'm here again and back in the flesh, so to speak, with Alexander Hall with Dispute Defense Consulting. How are you doing, Alex?
I'm doing great. It's great to see you again. Thank you.
You too. So for the folks that maybe didn't get a chance to hear our first two episodes, which were fantastic, by the way, just a little brief recap is that so far we've talked about self-checkout fraud, credit card fraud, gift card fraud. And the reason why we're talking with Alex is because he kind of went through a life of some crime, right? And reformed his ways. So Alex, it sounds like you've landed it with a new home, a new job. Do you want to tell us about that and where you're at today?
Sure. So with Dispute Defense, I was focusing on the entire marketplace. It was a lot of fun, made a lot of great people. And along that journey, Tom from Approved reached out to me and we had a few conversations. And after doing an assessment of their software, I was confident that they can be powerful in the space and wanted to help and contribute in any way I could. We talked it through and now I've got a new home. I'm excited to be here and yeah, it's a lot of fun.
Awesome. Awesome. So today we're going to talk about check fraud. Of all things, like who even uses a check anymore, except for maybe to get a refund check from the IRS, right? So
exactly.
Tell me a little bit about that. Like, and I'm always interested in how things get started, right? Like, what keyed you into that as a way of committing some fraud?
Sure. So first, I feel it's important to kind of articulate the difference between what it takes to counterfeit a credit card versus what it takes to counterfeit a check. So when we talk about cards, and I won't go into too much detail, but when you consider the hardware that's required, you need the card information, whether it's track information or the card account number, the CVV and whatever to duplicate a physical representation. Going down the physical path, you need the card stock, you need a reader writer, you need an embosser, you need a tin tipper or whatever it's called professionally, that's what we used to call it. You need all of these items to line up. And at the end of it, you're in for, if you buy everything brand new, you're in for thousands of dollars getting all brand new equipment. And you can go one step further and source what's called a direct to card, a DTC machine somewhere, and that alone in itself is worth thousands of dollars. Compare that to checks, and there's a stark contrast. To get a fully functional, all the bells and whistles check fraud lab. It requires a box that you can pick up in store locally. It requires an inkjet or laserjet printer. And then it requires the information. That all in can be $300-400. So just comparing those two, moving from cards to checks, is the more resourceful way to go. So there's that. That's the comparison between the two operations. When it comes to getting into check fraud, what got me into it was I put together the dots. I said, there are many merchants who still accept checks. They don't want to alienate the demographic of maybe the older generation that still wants to pay with checks. And they still have to accept payment from businesses. They still have to accept payment from, they have to cash payment, paychecks. They have to cash checks that are being handled for interpersonal transactions, payday loans. There's checks that go into the payday loan centers. The applications that exist for checks, even though it's not a primary payment method, exist all over the spectrum of the marketplace. So it's highly viable and very cheap to reproduce what is effectively an identical, undetectable end result.
So let's back up to the whole process. Were you doing a check washing where you get the live check and you wash it? Or were you actually acquiring the paper and printing on paper that you acquired somehow?
So I started off with washing. There's two chemicals that are being sold at the big box stores that help wash ink off of the checks. So one is heat, and the other one is a brake cleaner. I forgot what it's called, but anyway, these highly caustic solutions are able to get all the ink off of a paper, and therefore you can use it yourself. Well, in that process, what we'll do, or what was done, is you would take tape, highly adhesive tape, whatever, to block that off. So when you soak a particular, check or whatever it might be, you're saving that signature, or you're saving whatever text you wanted to save. So you isolate that, change what you want to change, and now you have what was truly issued. The problem with this, because it's a highly caustic solution or liquid, it tends to rough up the check, so it tends to get rough. Right. So I decided that it was quicker, or more reliable, I should say, to just start from scratch. Well, there are the boxes that are available at office supply stores, where you can get a hold of blank check stock. So you can get the Micker ink, and you can get the blank check stock, white all the way across. The only thing that's indicative the only indicator that's on the checks are going to be the little Micker line indication box that exists. And from there, whether or not the fraudster obtains personal checks or business checks or money orders or whatever it may be, anything that fits the format, the background can be made with Photoshop. The lines can be applied with CheckSoft, and then any inkjet requirements can go on there. So that's the second way. The third way is to leveraging business checks. As we all know, business checks are typically printed with laser inkjet or LaserJet printer toner, right? When it comes to that, you don't even need to soak it. You don't need to dissolve any of the material. A razor blade and a very finely tuned approach can hash mark all of the laser ink, lift it from the paper, and then run it through a printer again to print whatever information was required. So those are the three primary things. The most long drawn out process was creating the backgrounds in like Photoshop and printing it onto those blank check stock.
So you'd look at the original check and sort of like take a file or a snapshot of that and use it as your template when you recreated it after it was washed.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Scan it with a high DPI, plug it into Photoshop, identify where the template is, copy it across, and get as high resolution as possible so that it's as crisp and clean as possible. The process could take hours, but as we're all aware, a lot of checks are identical. So we see the same background many times. So once it's been made, it gets saved as a stock file. Yeah.
So how do you know that you've got a good account?
So that's actually really interesting. There's a method that I speak to today when I'm speaking to financial institutions. It's called third-party ATOs. And to answer your question, one element of that method is to access the transaction history. Well, you can access the transaction history by truly logging into the account on the front end of whatever, whether it's an app or a website, whatever it might be, or you can call in, and depending on the financial institution, they will ask for particular pieces of information. This can range from the billing address in conjunction with the account number. It could be the last four of the social security number. It could be the birthday. There's different combinations that exist. Once you call in and you get access to that transaction history, you get account balance, you get payments over time. You can establish a trend of payments and where the payments were spent. And if you get a big enough account, it makes sense to spend $15,000, $20,000 somewhere over spending $50. If you spend $50, that looks suspicious. You need to spend thousands of dollars to fit the transactions that are already in the account.
So as a consumer, right, I'm hoping that nobody out there has the last four of my social, hoping. So how would you be able to attain something like that? Is this all through phishing, or is it like live, like mailbox diving, that kind of thing? So
I never went out and collected any of the information. People in my operation would be tasked with different sourcing methods. So if that was a mailbox, if it was an internal agent being compromised, or any other way, they would go get that information. Yeah, and I should take this opportunity to say that I was more isolated than most operations are. I never really interacted with the dark web. I never got secondary information sold to me. I pursued keeping everything in-house and keeping my data sources as what I call organic as possible. I know it was put into action there, so you guys go get it, bring it to me. So now it's being put into action there, and now it's put into action here. No one else has it. It's not watered down. It's as reliable as it could be.
So theoretically, if you were to approach someone who's, you said an internal source, right? Again, theoretically, what would you be looking for? Like, who makes a good target if I'm out recruiting a co-conspirator?
Someone who doesn't like their job, someone who during that time, and I'm ashamed for doing this, but during that time I had connections with drug dealers and I had connections with the underworld. So if somebody would trade a stack of files for a particular amount of some drug, that was always useful back then. Those are probably the two ways. And then there's the third way, which is people want to get more than they deserve. So if they can just tweak the rules at their organization and be seen as helpful to an organization that'll pay them back $1,000 for a stack of files, a lot of people will jump on it.
Interesting. So these folks they're out and I'm assuming they're working in a variety of different places, right? But they have access to files. Is there something that, let's say, well, maybe you can help me with this. Give me an example of some type of place where they would work, where they would have access to files. Would it be a retailer or would it be a bank? Yes and yes. Okay.
Yeah. But the three most valuable ones that I came across were elective. What would they be considered? Doctors' offices for elective procedures. So like, like orthodontics or plastic surgery or endocrinology, I think is the other one. No, not rhinoplasty. I think that's the one I was going for.
Okay.
All of these elective services that aren't, necessarily life-saving. They're more elective. So those people typically have good accounts and good credit and good money sitting around. So that would be a target. Second would be high-end leasing agents, leasing offices.
Okay.
There were people that would just drive trucks through the windows and steal the entire file cabinet and come out. The last one that was valuable was the furniture stores that offer in-store financing, where you establish it in line with a credit application and on paper.
It's interesting you mentioned that last one. Back in the day when I was doing investigations, that we did a lot of work with furniture companies that they had a lot of problems. So let's use that one as an example then. What would be some tips you could provide to those companies to help safeguard their information? Let's say that you ran a furniture store. What would you think would be some helpful tips for them?
Yeah, I've worked with a couple of operations. I always revert down to, you can't secure a file cabinet from like pictures or to someone taking the paper. So I always say, even if the application comes in physically on a sheet of paper, digitize it and lock down access. Monitor the access, monitor where it went, who's getting it, who's accessing it, why they're accessing it. Any one of those questions can come into the mix. Don't store physical copies. Shred it, do whatever you need to do to get it into a digital, into a database, and then protect that database. Move over from in-store into the world of digital. That's the first step. Absolutely.
Okay. Yeah, it's I think probably way too easy to access this stuff, and especially, if you had your past connections with folks that were, their interest was trying to gain access to drugs. There's probably like this little highway going on of connections. That's what I'm imagining, right? So those folks hook you up, like they come to try and buy their drugs, and they're like, okay, let me tell you about this guy Alex who can help you. That could be kind of the way. Yeah, that's what I'm imagining.
Yeah, they'd say the people. So no one ever said my name, but they would know. They would say, there's a guy who's looking for this and you work here. Do you think you can do it? Yes. Okay, well, if you can come back here with 20 or 30 of those things, whichever profile sets, payment information, whatever it might be, you come back here with 20, 30, 100, I'll give you this. And that's typically how it worked. And then eventually I had people that would check the information against what was available public information to see what was valuable. In the store setting, it would be checking to see what credit lines were offered and established. And then that would filter up or filter down, depending on how you look at it, and ultimately make its way to my desk.
How would you access someone's credit history, or to see if their credit was good? How did you guys have access to that?
That was my That was my primary. So
Mm.
when you get a set of information, it can come in and be any number of data points across the singular identity data set. So if that's like your date of birth, social security number, whatever it may be. If the information allows someone like I was to, if it reveals that the person seems to be in good credit standing or making a lot of money, maybe they have cash in the bank or maybe they have good credit, one or the other. If that's enough information, that goes into this pile over here. Cool. When we start working that pile, I'm sorry, the other pile is for like mule accounts. They have really bad credit. They have really bad reliability. They can get cash, they can get checks cash, they can get secured cards, and they can get mule accounts, right, at different agencies. Grabbing the stack of who seem to be good on their credit worthiness, that's where my process of identity theft comes in. So it's a 5-step process. One is obtain the information and make a determination as to what pile it goes into. Secondarily, we all understood that there's 2 sets of information for any identity. Superficial information, which is gonna be your phone number, your billing address, your shipping address, your social media accounts, your email address, all these different things. And then underneath that is your credit profile. In order to gain access to the credit profile, it was necessary to flesh out the superficial information in order to make it past the security challenges to gain access to the credit profile. And what I learned during my time, and I hope this isn't accurate anymore, but what I learned during my time is the same questions were asked reliably, the same 50, 60, 100 questions, if you count their iterations, were asked by any credit check place to verify your identity, like where did you live in 1992 and how much was your mortgage payment for this, and all those different things. So depending on what card you're applying for, if you know what questions are going to be asked, you can build the profile accordingly, you have all the information ready, go in, answer the security questions, and boom, you've got access to the credit report. From there, and what most fraudsters don't do, is what I called credit injection. I would identify what telecom provider you have on there. I'd identify what fintech account you have, what financial institution, what credit union, all these different things, what mortgage payments, what car payments, anything. I would identify what was represented on the credit report, and I would associate a new one. So if you're with telecom company A and it's represented on your credit report, I'll go make an account with this identity at the telecom provider B. And now the information that I put is being injected into the credit report and the credit profile and is seen as reliable information. But I own that second phone that's now represented on the credit profile. So that's called credit injection.
Wow. So when you kind of parse the sort of the job functions out for this team, it almost seems like they had an assignment and they have to do their homework, right? They do as much research as they can on a person and find everything they can, like you mentioned, social media, anything they can find, basically.
Yeah, that's all part of building up the profile. And I should also say, I didn't just task out like one time, you go do this thing and come back. It was like, yo, drug dealer guy over there, keep your eyes open for this. If you see any opportunities, I might get worth your while. And then it just ran on autopilot. And every time there was a batch out to me, I reimbursed, and that was it. Yeah.
Okay. Wow. So backing up to the checks, right? So we talked about the different ways that you either created them or washed them. So I'm picturing the check then makes its way eventually into, and you've got a good account, you've verified all that. It makes its way out into the world. Let's talk about, so if I'm the person trying to present that check, who's gonna be my target? Like, where am I gonna try and spend that check at?
So am I allowed to say names of companies? I probably should stay away from that. Okay, let's consider one of the biggest brands that we're all familiar with. Let's just keep it like that.
Okay.
A check can be used for cashing, for deposits, for MoneyGram deposits, for and for payment. Yes. And then in addition to that, payroll comes out of that company, vendor payments come out of that company, and then of course someone has to pay the telephone bill, and all these. So checks are just flowing into and out of this organization is the point that I'm looking to make. When it boils down to it, 99% of the checks that I presented weren't even scrutinized for their accuracy by visual inspection. They had to be visually, accurate in order to run through the carousel. But as soon as that thing makes it through the Micker ink, and as long as it lines up through Certegy and check systems, which I made sure of, I would only take it to places that the transaction history supported. It seems like a trustworthy expenditure. It makes sense, and it goes. The unfortunate thing that I want to say is that a counterfeit check, if done correctly, there is no way to discern it from a legitimate check. You can meet every requirement of those security features.
Right. Especially if you have somebody who's really taking their time to do a really nice job on that check when they're creating it. It sounds like it's gonna be really tough. I was picturing the hashing with the razor. Like maybe there might look a little off, but if you've done enough of them, I'm sure you're going to get really good at it over time.
Yeah.
And it's a legitimate account, right? So how would a retailer, like, let's say somebody came in to use that, is there anything they can do to fight that?
I make it my job to come up with ways to combat what I used to do. And when it comes to check fraud, I can't think of anything that would stop it. And that's that. I don't like saying that. It stinks, but
Yeah.
the problem is, if we think about the process, a fraudster using a stolen check walks up and they say, hey, here's my check. Here's this ID that it's paying to. Cash the check for me, run it through for payment, whatever it might be. That Micker line gets read and it shoots out. There's no opportunities to collect data. And we could technically profile based on behavioral stuff in person, but that's not going to play over too well if you do that to everybody.
Right.
I'm very sorry, and I wish I could come up with something, but yeah, I haven't come up with anything yet.
So again, flashing back to my old days, trying to run down check fraud, I think where the fraudsters we ran into where they screwed up was they kept using the same name over and over. Like they knew that they had a good ID, that nobody had questioned it, so they got kind of lazy. So we were able to track them down that way. But if you're smart, a smart fraudster, you're going to continually change accounts, change IDs. So it becomes very difficult to track.
Absolutely.
Well, go to work on that one, please, for our audience. But I like that you're making us aware, and I hope folks out there will dig into it a little bit more and see that there probably is a big problem under the water they don't know about.
Absolutely, and you brought up a really good point. I don't represent the vast majority of fraudsters out there. They do exactly what you just said. I got this thing to run once, do it 1,000 times the exact same way. That way we can identify their failing points. And as you said, maybe it's coming from the same account. Maybe it's going to the same person. Maybe it's the same person coming in with 5 different IDs. Maybe it's the same check stock represented that you've never seen before, and you can identify it by seeing the same check stock across 10, 12 checks, all from, incrementally cashing higher value checks, and they don't look like they all have something in common. Again, I want to stay away from like the profile identity, but fraudsters look like fraudsters when they're sending out their minions, right? The minions look like minions, at least in my experience.
Yeah. We lost our connectivity there for a second.
Oh, are we good?
Yep, you're back now.
Okay.
The last thing you said was fraudsters look like fraudsters.
In my experience, fraudsters look like fraudsters. They don't keep themselves up. They're not very, now the high level guys, yes, they're walking around in suits because they feel like they've earned it. But they have to spread out the operation. They can't be the same face doing all these different things, and they can't use the same ID doing all of these things. So they have to spread it out. And the people that are willing to do this low level cash checking purchases, whatever it might be, they typically look pretty messy. So if you keep your eyes open, you can identify those operations. Yes.
Right. That's actually a really good segue. So after our last 2 podcasts, we put out a call for questions from people. And you mentioned fraudsters getting lazy. And one of the questions we had was, why were you never caught? and you and I have talked about this, and I know the answer, but maybe share with the audience why you were never caught.
So one is I didn't want to be any of the types of people like we just described. The same method, ran the same way with a different name, a different check, a different card. Never wanted to do that. It was part of my operation to find out a method that worked at one touch point using one type of method, using one type of person, run it through. I said, cool, I know that one now. So I'd write down how I did it. Not really, but take a note, shove it in a drawer somewhere and go find another one somewhere else. And then, oh, I got that one to go through. That's cool. And then put that in my desk and just keep exploring. So in all reality, my face wasn't seen because I tried to do everything as digitally as possible. Two, my network was ever growing. No one in my network never ever got busted as well, because you just spread everything out and you make everything inconclusive. So like if it's a mail checking account paying someone, if we're sticking to checks, if it's a mail account paying out, you send a female in with the card. So then it's just like, well, we know that's wrong, but we don't know where to look and we don't know who that is. So it's a dead end. The same thing goes for whenever people are trying to withdraw from ATMs and mule accounts. If you have money deposited into an account you have access to, you send a female in to withdraw from a male account. That's especially useful if you're using somebody who submitted themselves to be a mule. Well, so if Jimmy over here makes an account for us to use, and every interaction that's on video is being done by with Samantha, right? Some female, things don't line up, and it's easy enough for Jimmy to go back and say, well, the whole thing was fraud, right? So spreading things out, keeping everyone on the toes, maintaining inconsistency, and attacking every single touch point across the customer experience journey, whether it was a retailer or a financial institution or an e-commerce store or any number of things. Identifying every touch point is being handled in siloed operations. I now know, I didn't know this back then, but doing things a different way to get different results was part of the game back then. Where can I poke and where can I get by? That's where my pride was at the time. It's how many different ways can I get what I want from how many different companies? And I think that contributed a lot to it. The second part of that is no one ever knew anything. No one ever knew an entire idea of any part of my operation. No one knew it from beginning to end. I'd have one person for this thing, one person for that thing, one person for that thing. That way, even if they wanted to roll up on me or roll on me, they call it, they didn't have all the information. They just know, oh, well, I gave this dude a thumb drive. Great.
Yeah. So for an investigator,
those are contributing.
Yeah, I would say as an investigator, then you have to be tireless and follow every lead. Because when you think you've got to the head of the pyramid, it probably haven't. You've probably just gotten, just to the next step, which is interesting.
Yeah.
So another person asked about interviews by the police and by LP. And again, you and I talked about this. You, of course, never sat through one because you weren't caught. But what about people that that got caught? Do you think that they ever talked to the police? And if not, why not? And if so, why?
So yeah, we spoke about the LP, and just as a quick recap, there was those two retailers who intimidated the heck out of people in jail by building up the worksheets to a point of prosecution. The person walks in, tries to do something, they haul them off, and they get some time out of them. When it comes to intimately knowing somebody who happened to go down for fraud, I can confidently say no one has, not nobody, but reliably, people don't really open up during those things. And there's two reasons primarily. One, the successful people who are operating this way, they have legal representation because they've made money and can hold that down. So one, there's that, and we know you don't talk, you talk to your lawyer, you don't talk, you talk to your lawyer. But then second, there's this anvil hanging over each and every one of our heads regarding criminal retaliation. If we let too much information out and it connects the dots in an investigation and someone else goes down, the nice way to put it is that's grounds for termination. So everyone has that over their head. And so if you get sloppy, you get busted, you go down, even if it wasn't your operation, you're the one who messed up.
Right. It's frightening. Absolutely frightening. Yeah. So I think there's plenty of motivation for people not to talk to LP, police, and it's, but I can tell you, I don't remember the last person that I apprehended and had arrested where they had a lawyer on retainer. So to me, that would be a red flag. If I'm an investigator and the person I just caught and sent through the system has a lawyer on retainer, there might be something else to look into there. Dig a little deeper, maybe. Yeah, for sure. Okay, awesome. Well, I think we've come to our time, and this has been fantastic conversation as usual. So what I'd like to do is encourage people again to send in questions, and we'll post the email address where they can send in their questions when we post our podcast. But thank you again, Alex. Appreciate your time, and we'll talk again soon.
Thank you, Stephanie. Have a good one, everybody.